This is Curious Brainfarts.
Hi Lou.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Absolutely ruddy marvellous. How are you?
Yes, very good. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Yes, the washing is on the line and all is well with the world.
I mean, sounds like a standard Thursday.
Mm, agreed.
Love that.
Apart from when it's raining, right?
Yes. Washing dries less well in the rain.
Fact. Fact number one, everybody.
And next week on the Good Housekeeping Guide, we're going
Next
to
week.
talk about baking paper.
Next week on Stating the Bleeding Obvious.
Whatever.
Mm.
So what's been going on in your world? Oh, I know.
What?
Nige Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Little Nigey YG. He's had to have well, he didn't have to. He has had an operation.
Nigel has got no nuts.
No nuts, Nige.
He is 3.5, and I made the decision to get his nuts chopped off.
Lovely.
There's a complicated backstory, but the bottom line is he doesn't have no nuts no more.
Amazing. No nuts, Nige.
So
Bless him.
I actually found that to be, I mean, my God, the vets we use, they're so good. He's very nervous of the vets, la-di-da, all this stuff. We had a dog before who was, the dog didn't live to be one. There was something, they think autoimmune wrong with this dog. And he had operations and he had this and he had that. Oh, my days. So I had that all activated. And it was so interesting because I'd, of course, avoided getting Nigel castrated. There were all sorts of logical reasons why I'd done that, but actually why I'd done it is because I didn't want to repeat of the Basil situation, our other dog. Now, that's not logical. It doesn't make any sense per se. The two things are very, very different, but I wasn't on the logical field of play at that time.
No, and that's interesting because when we're triggered by something, that's often the situation. It's not necessarily a logical thing, and yet it's something that, I've got huge compassion for with that situation with Nige and everything that happened to poor little Basil. And yeah, so I guess as well, it doesn't need to be logical.
No, it doesn't need to be logical, and that's a good job because it isn't. And but what I was really valued about the experience, because I had my hand forced into making this decision, in a way by my circumstances where I live, and fine. But what I realized was I was pulling around with me these triggers, which I didn't realize were there because I'd avoided activating them, but not realizing I was doing that.
Yes.
And so how fabulous to have the opportunity to A, see that they're there, B, go, okay, thanks very much. And kind of shed some layers of that stuff, Yeah. So all good. Nigel's wearing the it's not the cone of shame because my friend's mum gave me this inflatable ring which is round his neck.
So is it the ring of remorse?
He is probably quite remorseful, to be fair. And luckily, it's not the Ring of Fire, so we're all good.
But that is a relief.
Yes, the Ring of
Bless
Remorse.
little
So,
Nige.
poor old Nigel, but actually, he's an absolute champ. And Felix slept downstairs Friday night and Saturday night to be with him, which was very sweet. But then when Nigel did wake up and make a right old ruckus, Felix didn't wake up. It's hilarious. I woke up.
He's a champion sleeper.
He is an absolute ninja at the sleeping. So fair play. And so, yeah, vibrancy, but not unwelcome is basically where we'll be.
Love that. Absolutely amazing.
I wonder
Absolutely
whether, I don't know whether we've done an episode on this, but I wonder whether we talk about triggers.
Well, I was wondering the same thing because it feels like we have done something similar because we have talked about triggers before.
Have we?
Just not as an episode oodles. And that might be something that we stumble upon in the near future. Who knows? One thing that is exciting is that we are getting closer to the Superfan miniseries beginning.
Yes. Every day is a day closer.
It's true. That again is a fact.
Yeah. That's just called time, the passage thereof.
And we've done an episode on that. I know that for sure.
Are you looking up whether we've done a triggers?
I am, yes.
We've got full runs of spreadsheet, dear listeners, of these things because
Of the ones that we've done.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's not ones we haven't done.
No, that would be difficult, wouldn't it? They're the ones we haven't done.
Here's a list of all the episodes we've not recorded. Right, okay.
Right.
So I'm just running a pivot table at the moment.
Roger that.
It's quite complicated.
Yeah.
And once I've got a graph. I'm just quickly looking at the graph. It's sort of like a pie chart.
Okay.
Yeah. And the segments are the number of episodes that we have recorded called Triggers and the episodes we haven't. And the pie is very, very interesting.
Tell me more.
So, I don't want to overcomplicate it. So, the crux of it is, having analysed that quite carefully, and I have had to annotate on it.
Right.
It's what
I hope you had consent for that.
Yes. What I've had to... I've come to the conclusion that basically the largest segment in the pie, which I needed to cross-reference, was that we have not done triggers, which I find remarkable. And that was quite complex to get to that point.
Yeah. I hear
I'll
you,
show
brother.
you later the number of pivot tables. It's just ridiculous.
Do you know what? I haven't got a maths degree, Paul, and I don't know if I'll be able to cope with it. But you explained it beautifully and very clearly.
There were some V lookups, there were some H lookups, there was all sorts of stuff going on.
All of the lookups, yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Calculating fields and it's just exhausting.
Oh my God. Anyway, I guess the question then is, do you want to trigger it? Do you want to?
No, I'm feeling triggered by that. Yeah, I mean, fine. Let's talk about triggers. For God's sake.
Fine. I was doing this thing.
I should be able to cook the dinner, by the way, on the heat being kicked out of the RTG because I fired it up earlier. So what I may do partway through the episode, as we're not going to use the RTG and I'm going to power it off, I will start cooking the dinner on the residual.
No, great. Heat. What are you having?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be pork chops and a vegetable surprise.
I was just going to say you could roast a pig on there or a sheep or something.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I got a lot of bits. of
Okay,
pork
good.
chops. Great.
Easy with the details, Paul. A lot of
Listen,
bits.
listen. I just, yeah. I'm mindful that I am going on quite a lot about the dinner plans, so I'll spare you more of the details.
You've just triggered everyone about that. Be prepared. So, so triggers.
You ready?
Apart from being a character in Only Fools and Horses,
Yes.
tell us.
That's for a particular demographic of our listeners.
Yes.
So, according to Cambridgeland,
Mm.
something that causes someone to feel upset and frightened because they are made to remember something bad that has happened in the past. It's very interesting. An event or situation that causes something to start. And to cause a strong emotional reaction of fear, shock, anger, or worry in someone, especially because they are made to remember something that has happened in the past. Interesting. A part of a gun that causes the gun to fire when pressed. And an event, situation, etc. that causes the start of something, especially something bad. It's very negative.
Yes, very. We don't talk about being triggered positively, though, do we?
To make a piece of equipment, etc., start working. Any attempt to jack the car off the ground triggers the alarm automatically.
Mm.
It's actually massive.
What triggers?
Yeah. And that is, just to be clear, that's not the character from Winnie the Pooh.
That's Tigger. There's no ruh.
Correct.
Trigger is a
Happy
character
TV.
in. Yeah. There we are, Trigger Happy TV. So it's interesting that we don't say. So you sometimes see on social media trigger warning,
Mm.
and then people will put a category because obviously they don't want their post to have a detrimental impact on others.
Yes.
And you don't know, of course, unless they told you what other people's trigger areas may or may not be.
Mm-hmm.
As per my story at the opening of this recording,
Oh.
you might not
Where is
know
the
what your
trigger
triggers
warning?
are.
Trigonometry. I
Triggers.
find that quite triggering.
Is it
That's when-
negative?
That's when
Because
different
it's-
angles can set you off.
What trigonometry?
Yeah.
Boom, boom. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-da. Is it because that it's associated with a gun that we perceive it to, and guns?
No, I
kill?
don't think so. Not from the. Yes, there was a lot of negative stuff, but it was also like triggering part of a chain reaction, triggering something to start.
But I suppose a race is started by off of the olden days of yonder and yore. You'd have the starter's pistol, wouldn't you? Your trigger finger.
Yeah, and then when you trigger something.
The way I look at that sometimes is, an inner trigger, an emotional trigger, if you like.
Yeah.
Where you feel disabled by this overwhelming set of emotions.
Yeah.
Like I did last week.
Yeah.
My head didn't go under the water and stay under, but I did. It was, this wave of emotions that needed to be, what's the word? Felt and processed, I suppose. And it's almost when you are triggered. Well, I'll talk for myself. When I am triggered, there's no masking that. There's no covering that up. It's quite a large response potentially. or quite an upsetting response, or um and so just like the start of a race or the trigger of a chain reaction, off it goes. It's this internal house of cards, and bang, 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 and it's linked to your previous experience.
Yeah, I think about it in terms of triggering more than one thing. So I was just thinking about laughing, for example. You know, I said something which triggered somebody and they started to laugh. Triggering a chain reaction.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wouldn't necessarily use the word triggered in that sentence. Do you see what I mean?
Triggered a series of events.
Yeah.
Now, I know what you mean. You're talking, from what you're saying, you're talking very much about like the emotional state.
But I think that's how we associate now the word.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just playing with other things, not just wanting to, talk about one area. I was just thinking about other ways because, yes, the word isn't used very much. That. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it in terms of, which profession talks about triggering a sequence of events, or, I'm sure there's something I've heard recently. Oh, actually, there's that. Oh my goodness me, yeah. It's not particularly happy. I've started watching that adolescence program as Olivia, my middle one, recommended it. And that is a trigger of, well, it's triggering. And a set of events have been triggered, circumstances have been triggered by certain things. So there's, that is quite triggery in lots of different ways. Which is interesting. So let's maybe then, as you brought it up, let's talk more about emotional triggers.
Well, I think the reason I brought it up is because, as I say, that's how I think the word is used in the parlance of our times most commonly now. And I think it's helpful because it's a way of us acknowledging that something's been activated in us. We don't necessarily have to explain what that is.
I think it's also used as it can be easily weaponized, like with lots of things that we talk about on this show. It can be easily weaponized. You've triggered me.
Yeah.
Now I can be passive aggressive and shut you down.
Yes, that's right.
And because you've triggered me, you're cancelled.
Yes. Yeah. Who's accountable for managing the trigger? You or the other person? Do you know what I mean? Am I if I said to you, Paul, you've triggered me by that. What would you do with that information? You might feel remorseful. You might laugh in my face. Or, you, Paul, would have a kind and compassionate response to that. But then I'm not handing that emotional distress to you, am I? And saying, please solve it for me by telling you that you've triggered me. Maybe some people do invite that. I don't know.
And that can be received as an emotional drive-by. You've triggered me. Like what? Which is sort of just throwing something out the car window as you go past. So I think, like with lots of things, it comes back to the intent and how do we deliver that and what is the value, so like you said, when feeling emotionally triggered, I have bigger responses to things that can come from nowhere.
Yeah.
absolutely nowhere, and all of a sudden I go from a 0 to 11, and I'm like, where the hell has that come from? And so there's that to bear in mind, and then think, taking a moment, pausing, so like stepping back slightly from that triggered response for a moment, before I then say to someone, you've triggered me. What's the value of me saying that? It's clear I'm discombobulated, so what's the value of saying it? Maybe coming back to it, how I might approach it is coming back to it later when I feel steadier, which could be within the same conversation, or it might be in some period of time, long enough for me to have stepped back from it, to then say, hey, I really struggled with that thing because it triggered this thing in me.
Yes, indeed. So,
because that's really what it is.
Yeah, that's right. It set off a chain reaction inside of you that the other person didn't intend, because they don't potentially know it's there. And to just, like you say, just say, I'm finding this really tricky. With your permission, I'd like to come back to it later once I've had a chance to regulate or whatever. I think that's it's different if people have got, a PTSD type of responses. It depends on what the trigger is, right, and how that's showing up for them. Trigger, you might be completely disabled in the sense that you can't have an interaction until the fight flight, because it activates that part of us, doesn't it? That nervous system response where what it can do. Like you say, you go from 0 to 11 very, very quickly.
And yeah, I think for me the key thing is the way, if I spoke about it at all, would be it triggered in me. That conversation triggered in me.
Yes. Rather, not you triggered me.
Not when you said this, you triggered me. No. When you said this, it triggered in me.
Yeah.
That's probably how I would approach it. And, you and I have had conversations like this in, when things have arisen like that. And I think when we first started having these kind of conversations, it was very much more along the lines of, I feel triggered by what you said, or whatever, which was a sort of a middle ground, because it's still laying it at someone else's door to some extent. And, yes, there is credence to that, and it's not to leave a smelly brown parcel on someone's doorstep.
No, indeed. But if you say to somebody, I remember saying to somebody, the language you're using, I'm finding that difficult because of this reason, because of an experience I have had. There's nothing to do with you.
No.
However, I'm finding that language quite difficult. My experience.
Was it Swedish?
But it was triggering some very abusive things that had happened to me, and it was like this person didn't know that's what they were doing, of course.
No.
But once I disclosed to them, they didn't change their behavior.
Nice. That's lovely.
And I was just like, and we are done here.
Romeo done.
Very much end, because then there was some gaslighting, and like, what? Don't be so sensitive. Like, what's your problem?
Love a bit of gaslighting.
So, it can if you disclose in a way that isn't leaving a smelly brown parcel at someone's doorstep, that you've had an experience that's causing you to respond to their choice of language in a certain way, and the other person does not accommodate, which they could
Mm,
easily
mm,
do,
mm.
that for me is not okay.
Mm. The thing that was just going through my head was around the trigger. Actually, you sort of alluded to this in the opening, being a gift because it's pointing the way to something
Yeah.
that isn't healed, that isn't addressed or given any
Yes.
airtime or whatever,
Yes.
and it is fully suppressed until the point when it's triggered, but doing, and then it's like, eBay, gum, and it suddenly comes to the surface and gets some air.
Yeah.
So even when, I think about people I've encountered that I have found triggering, for example, like their behaviour or the way they talk or whatever, it's very interesting because that's if I was being compassionate, it's a very gentle, kind steer towards some things for me to work on.
Yeah.
And I find that that's sometimes also very difficult because it requires me to be in quite a steady place, quite a, not constantly, like in that moment. I need to be able to hold myself, even if lots of other people around me are finding the behaviour triggering or the person or whatever. I need to own mine, and therefore I need to hold myself steady to get curious about, well, so where's that coming from? What are you trying to tell me? What have I not listened to or addressed or whatever?
Yeah, so
So,
some really helpful questions like you're starting to allude to there, Paul. We can actually have this inner dialogue with the triggered part of us. What are they afraid of? What are they trying to tell us? What do they want us to know? What do we need to be careful of? Listening to what they want us to know.
yeah,
Because it's been my experience, and we're all different, but it's been my experience that if I don't listen to these triggers, in the end, I get a metaphorical boulder to the face, which is, it doesn't need to be a big event or circumstance, but something that says, please don't ignore me anymore.
yeah,
Which
is fair.
Which is completely fair.
So in that respect, if these are these gentle pointers, nudges towards unhealed parts of us, I guess it's kind of really good that we've got to be triggered, because that's an invitation. Actually, it's like, wow, thank you for pointing that out to me, because I would never have seen it otherwise. And just thinking, the more attached I am to that identity which the trigger is presenting, the harder it is for me to be able to take a step back. So the more I associate with that trigger, if that then makes a bunch of stories run in parallel, or if I then go, oh yes, well, I'm like that because, or whatever. I'm not, by the way, don't think I'm minimizing any of these things.
No.
What the point I'm trying to make is that the more I associate with the trigger, the more I am triggered. The more
Yes.
I can recognize the trigger is popping up and then take the step back. I'm not like gaslighting the trigger. Instead, I'm then able to ask, what is it you need me to know? So if I suddenly boil over in anger from nowhere, out of nothing,
and that's uncharacteristic for you. You're not an angry person at all.
No, that's right. So, I mean, just thinking about it like as an example, if I was to boil over in anger for no reason out of something, and instead of me saying, what is it you need me to know? I was going, well, that's bloody right, I should be because rah, 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 and then I start supporting the narrative, I learn
Yeah.
nothing. I just get triggered again and again and again.
Mm.
As opposed to saying, what is it you need me to know? Why are we angry? Like, where's this coming from? And just having that brief moment so that I can dissociate from this identity, this story, this narrative, whatever it is that is fueling the trigger.
Yes, because that's absolutely right. Because my system
Mm-hmm.
was trying to keep me safe from feeling really sad
Yeah.
about Nigel, you know. In other words, it was using my past experience to project into the future about what might happen to Nigel. The last time a dog of mine had any kind of surgery, it ended up
Yeah.
dying.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
oh, we avoid, but in the end, we can't. Thank you, universe, for providing those circumstances.
Yeah.
And then I see, oh, I'm carrying this grief around. Oh, I see. So it was really helpful.
Mm.
But you need to, for me, I needed to feel it first. It
Mm.
was funny. I went into the bakery after. There's this lovely bakery opposite the vets. I went in there and people are a bit like, is this middle-aged woman crying in the bakery?
Oh.
It was fun because we're all very British about it. We're like, ooh, would you like some hot cross buns?
Bless.
Hello.
It's difficult. It's really difficult. Yeah. So I don't think there's, for me, I am curious about how quickly I can create the space
Yeah.
between, like, the actually we talked about what's his face the other day, not just
Viktor
Eckhart Tolle,
Frankl.
Viktor Frankl. Yeah, you know, I'm curious about how quickly I can tune into that space
Yeah.
so that I can learn something from it, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
Even things like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily need to be super bad. It could be like attention or distraction, you know. And it might be, you know, so your attention, your focus could be triggered by something, a noise, I don't know, typically like a bloody notifications or something like that. And it's like, okay, so what are you trying to tell me?
It's a great example.
Maybe there's a dopamine hit that we could have. So let's quickly look at it and see what it is, and then end up down some little rabbit hole of. I did that literally earlier today. I was working on something, and then like there was a bong, or I had an idea about something else that popped in my head. So I was triggered from meaning starting a chain reaction, starting something, and I started looking at something else completely different. Yeah. And then I was like 15, 20 minutes in, and I'm like, oh, hold on a minute, I wasn't meant to be doing this.
Suddenly you're looking at acoustic guitars. You're like, Hank, what?
What?
Sorry,
who?
what?
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. And that's something that I'm very curious about for myself, because it's not necessarily that it's bad.
No.
It's that and it wasn't that the thing I was working on was difficult or, you know, painful or anything like that.
No.
I just got caught by something. Like the magpie.
So it's interesting. We have this view of triggers, don't we? Which is that they are big emotional events, but they are actually of all shapes and sizes, and can be just that chain reaction that you're talking about that ends up down some YouTube rabbit hole where you're looking at tiling and you're not quite sure why you're looking at tiling. But you are. Nothing needs tiling in your life. Nonetheless, you're engrossed by the grouting of this bathroom. But you know, that's okay, because maybe you just needed a small rest from what you're doing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, this podcast is triggered by us having something in our diary every week, every Thursday, to make sure we get this flipping thing done.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it won't be triggered and it won't get done.
Yes, true. True fact. So I guess that the big thing when these kind of emotional triggers inside of us get activated is there's something for us to learn. There's a way for us to grow through it. And sometimes we can tune into that in the moment, sometimes we can't. But they are showing us bits of us that aren't healed, that need some attention, that need something from us. Yeah, whatever that is.
Yeah. And just starting by noticing is fantastic.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to just default and just to keep going and never to notice.
Well, yeah, it's easier that way because you don't have to turn and face it. It's only when, Paul, you've swept so many things under the rug, you can no longer get the door open, that you might have to look at them.
Yes.
Is my experience.
You have to use the fire escape.
Yeah, hack a hole in the wall. It's easier than...
Yeah, clearing that stuff up. Well, this is great. I am going to go off and check under my proverbial rug, as it were.
As it very much were, yes.
And see what I can trip over and hopefully not get triggered in the process. And at least I know that if I do, it's a path for me to grow.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to go and hang some more washing on the line. So there.
Okay, great.
Fine.
Now, we are very keen to hear from you people, you lovely people. So if you would like to get in touch, this episode we're only accepting wax seals. So so if you want to get in touch, you need
I find that a bit triggering.
Okay, fine. You need to send us some parchment to curiousbrainfarts@gmail.com with a wax seal on it.
Lovely.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
Right, well, I'm going to go and trigger something else now.
Okay, good. Your mere presence, Paul, is triggering for some in a good way. In a good way.
Given you just spent the last half an hour saying how negative triggers are. Oh my God. That's beautiful. Well,
very.
Bon voyage.
And mange too.
Canard. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Curious Brain Thoughts.